She had a spreadsheet. That is the first thing you need to know about Amara Osei. Not that she was brilliant, though she was. Not that she had spent 11 years crossing the world on research grants and academic fellowships, sleeping in guest houses that smelled like mildew and ambition, eating whatever was put in front of her without complaint. Not that she had photographed sacred objects in Ghana, Japan, India, South Korea, Nepal, Thailand, and 6 other countries whose entry stamps filled 2 full passports. The first thing you need to know is that she had a spreadsheet, color-coded, sortable by country, by century, by iconographic category, by access difficulty. Every sacred site she had ever visited was in there. Row after row after row of ancient things that humans had decided mattered, rendered into tidy columns by a woman who had decided, somewhere along the way, that the only safe relationship with mystery was to organize it. She had 217 entries. Futarasan Shrine in Nikko, Japan, was about to become the 218th. She had highlighted it yellow. Yellow meant difficult access. Yellow meant the head priest had already said no to at least 2 people before her, and the 2 people before her were better credentialed than she was, or at least they thought they were. Yellow meant she had written 4 letters, 3 formal, 1 honest, and waited 4 months for a reply that came on a Tuesday, in a plain white envelope, with her name written in ink, so careful it looked like it had been practiced first. 2 hours. That was what the letter said. She could have the statue for 2 hours on the morning of December 9th. She booked the flight before she finished reading. December in Nikko is not a comfortable experience. The cedars that line the approach roads to the shrine complex are old enough that they have stopped being trees and started being something else. Vertical, patient, indifferent, enormous. Walking beneath them feels less like being outdoors and more like being inside a cathedral that was built by something that did not care whether you noticed it or not. The cold comes down through the canopy in flat, quiet layers. It does not bite. It simply occupies you. Amara took the bus from Nikko station. 14 minutes. She spent 11 of those minutes reviewing her notes on the Okami, the wolf deity of Futarasan, a guardian figure associated with the mountains, with protection, with the boundary between the world that humans can see and the one they cannot. She had read every paper written about this statue in English, Japanese, and the one academic French article that she had run through a translator with mixed results. She knew what it looked like from photographs. Stone, seated, roughly the size of a medium dog. Dating to somewhere around 1040 CE, give or take 2 decades that historians had been arguing about for longer than she had been alive. The wolf was a Magamagashi guardian, a warding presence, a thing that sits at the threshold and decides who passes. She knew all of that. She had organized all of that into her spreadsheet. What she could not organize, what she had refused to organize for 11 years of doing exactly this kind of work, was the way sacred objects made her feel when she stood in front of them, because they made her feel nothing. She had stood in front of objects that had driven pilgrims to tears, objects that monks had spent lifetimes protecting, objects that entire cultures had oriented themselves around like planets around a sun, and she had felt nothing, not coldness, not detachment, something worse than both, familiarity. The comfortable, professional familiarity of a person who has arranged her entire life so that nothing can surprise her anymore. The bus stopped. She got off. She pulled her coat tighter and walked into the cedar forest. The head priest of Futarasan Shrine was a man named Reverend Takahashi, and he was 73 years old, and he was small. She was not expecting him to be small. The letters had felt large. Not arrogant, nothing like arrogance, but weighty in the way that letters from people who understand their own authority tend to feel weighty. She had prepared herself for someone tall, someone with the bearing of a man who has spent decades in proximity to things that are old and serious. He was 5'4", and he had the careful, economical movements of someone who had learned a long time ago that nothing in this world required rushing. He looked at her camera bag. She had seen that look before. It was the look her father used to give to boys who came to the house. Not hostile, not welcoming, simply watchful. The look of someone deciding. 2 hours, he said. In English, that was clear enough to tell her he had prepared the boundary in advance. 2 hours, she said back. He nodded once. He turned. She followed. The inner courtyard was accessed through a wooden gate that was low enough that she had to bend her head slightly. Designed, she had read, to make visitors bow whether they intended to or not. She bent her head. She stepped through. She did not think about bowing. Later, she would. The secondary inner courtyard was separated from the main approach by a wooden lattice screen so old that the wood had turned the color of storm clouds. Through the lattice, she could see a stone platform, and on the stone platform, she could see the wolf. She set her bag down on the pavement carefully. Methodically, she removed the camera, checked the lens, checked the aperture settings for the light conditions. Overcast, flat, the kind of winter light that gives nothing away. She attached the wide strap to her wrist. She did everything in the order she always did it, because doing things in order was how she had managed the last 11 years of standing in front of things that were supposed to be extraordinary. She positioned herself at the lateral angle specified in her notes. Not direct. The shrine staff were tolerant of documentation, but not of what they perceived as confrontation. Pointing a camera directly at a guardian figure was confrontation. She had learned this in Kyoto. In a moment she preferred not to revisit. She raised the camera. She exhaled. She looked through the viewfinder at the stone wolf, who had been sitting in that exact position for approximately 1,000 years, who had watched the cedar forest grow up around the shrine, who had watched centuries of pilgrims come and bow and leave, who did not care at all about aperture settings or academic fellowships or color-coded spreadsheets. And then her lens cap fell. It hit the stone courtyard floor with a sound that was entirely too loud for how quiet everything was. It bounced once. It rolled 3 feet to the left, smooth and purposeful, like it had somewhere to be. And then it stopped. It stopped exactly between her and the wolf. She stared at the lens cap. The lens cap did nothing. She was a professional researcher with a doctorate from one of the finest universities in England, who had spent 11 years documenting sacred iconography across 14 countries, who had written peer-reviewed papers about the semiotics of divine animal figures in pre-modern East Asian religious culture. She stared at the lens cap like it had personally wronged her. Lord have mercy. She bent down. She picked it up. She straightened. She looked at the wolf. The wolf's head was inclined, not cracked, not shifted, not the way stone shifts after centuries of cold and heat working their slow argument through the material. Not fallen, not damaged, inclined, the way a person inclines their head when they recognize someone coming toward them that they didn't expect to see, the way your grandmother does it from across a room when you arrive somewhere she wasn't sure you were going to arrive. Tilted down, toward her, about 15 degrees. She counted to 11. She did not decide to count. Her hands counted. Her hands had always counted when something inside her chest was doing something it was not supposed to do. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The stone wolf looked at her with a head that had not been in that position an hour ago, or a day ago, or a decade ago, because she had the photographs to prove it, because every paper ever written about this statue showed the same level, forward-facing profile, because 1,000 years of documentation said that this head was straight, and it was not straight anymore. 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. She was the kind of person who had organized her entire life around the idea that the world did not contain anything that could not eventually be indexed. She had done this on purpose. She had done this because the alternative, the version of herself that believed in things, that let herself be surprised by things, that stood in front of something old and holy and felt something move in her chest, that version of herself had been badly hurt the last time she tried it. Not by something sacred, by something ordinary, someone ordinary. She had closed that door with both hands and bolted it and put furniture in front of it, and she had been perfectly fine ever since. 11. She took the photograph. Not because she had 31 frames left in her documentation plan. She took it because something in her chest, something she had not heard from in 4 years, something she had been quite certain she'd successfully starved out, recognized what it felt like to be standing in front of something that could see you, not your credentials, not your spreadsheet, not the carefully organized version of yourself that you present to the world. You. She took the photograph. Then she took another one. And another. She photographed the wolf from the lateral angle she had planned. She moved left and took more. She moved right. She crouched and took it from below. She stood on her toes and took it from above. She used every frame she had, and then she stood there with an empty card and the camera hanging from her wrist and the stone wolf's head inclined toward her in a courtyard where nothing moved except the tiny visible breath she was making in the cold December air. She was not crying. She was not praying. She had her lens cap in her left hand, and she was holding it so tightly that later, when she unpacked in her hotel room, she would find a circular mark pressed into her palm that took 2 days to fade. There are things that happen to people that do not fit into the stories they have told about themselves. Amara had told herself a very specific story. The story went like this. She was good at her work. She was thorough. She was careful. She did not allow herself to be taken in by the emotional theater that surrounded sacred objects, because the emotional theater was not the point. The iconography was the point. The history was the point. The cultural function was the point. She was a scientist of sacred things. She kept appropriate distance. She had learned, the hard way, that appropriate distance was the only thing that held. The story was good. It was well constructed. She had been telling it for 4 years, and she believed most of it. The wolf did not care about the story. The wolf had been sitting in that courtyard for 1,000 years, watching people come to it with their stories, pilgrims with their grief, priests with their devotion, scholars with their clipboards, tourists with their phones, and it had been waiting, perhaps, for someone who had organized herself so thoroughly against being seen that when it finally happened, when the stone finally moved, and the head finally tilted down toward a woman in a winter coat with a camera strap around her wrist, she would understand exactly what was being offered. Not miracle, not magic, not proof of anything she could publish or index or place into a color-coded cell in a spreadsheet. Recognition. The oldest and most devastating thing one thing can offer another. She was still in the courtyard when Reverend Takahashi came to find her. She became aware that she was on her knees approximately 3 seconds before she heard his footsteps. She did not know when she had gone down. One moment she had been standing with her camera and her lens cap and her counted seconds, and then at some point after that she was kneeling on the cold stone of the inner courtyard of a 1,000-year-old shrine in the Nikko mountains, and she was not sure how the transition had happened. She heard him stop beside her. He did not say anything immediately. He stood there, this small, careful man who had given her 2 hours and was now at the end of them, and he looked at the wolf. She could see him in her peripheral vision. He stood very still. He looked at the statue for a long time. When he spoke, it was in Japanese, not the careful English he had used at the gate. His own language. He spoke quietly, the way people speak in places they have known for a long time. She caught most of it. Not all. What she caught was, "It has been a long time since it has done that." She turned her head to look at him. He was still looking at the wolf. She said, in English, the only thing she could think of to say, "Done what?" He looked at her then. His expression was not mysterious. It was not the knowing look of someone performing wisdom. It was the expression of someone who has watched something happen that he has heard described, that he half believed in, that has now occurred in front of him and left him exactly as uncertain as he was before. He did not answer. He looked at her for a moment. He looked at the wolf. He looked at her again. Then he bowed slightly and walked back toward the main gate, and she watched him go, and the wolf's head stayed where it was, inclined 15 degrees down, toward the place where she had been standing when the lens cap fell. She sat in that courtyard for another 20 minutes. Nobody came to move her. Nobody came to tell her the 2 hours were up and she needed to leave. Either Reverend Takahashi had extended an unofficial grace that he would never acknowledge in writing, or the shrine staff had simply decided, for reasons of their own, to leave the foreign researcher alone on the cold stone until she was ready. She looked at the wolf. She thought about her spreadsheet. She thought about what category you put something in when you cannot explain it, when it does not fit the framework you have spent 11 years building, when the object you came to document has done something that objects are not supposed to do. She thought about the field log entry she was going to have to write. She thought about the photographs. She thought about her palm and the circular mark the lens cap was pressing into it, and she opened her hand and looked at it and then closed it again. She thought, for one moment, about the person she had been 4 years ago, before she bolted that particular door. The version of herself that would not have needed to count to 11. The version of herself that would have gone straight to her knees without the delay. She did not think about that version of herself for long, but she thought about her. That evening, in the hotel room in Nikko that smelled like cedar and the particular brand of silence that only exists at altitude, Amara sat on the edge of the bed and went through her photographs. She was methodical about it. She always was. She had a process: import, review, flag, catalog. She did the import. She opened the review window. She went through the frames, one by one. The wolf, lateral angle, head level. The wolf, lateral angle, head level. The wolf, lateral angle, head level. The wolf repositioned slightly left, head level. The wolf crouched angle, head level. Frame after frame after frame. 30 frames, all consistent. The wolf in perfect kept stillness, the way stone has always been still, the way things that do not move sit in photographs and stare. She went through all 30. She came to the 31st. The 31st frame was blurry, not motion blurred, not camera shake. She did not shake. She was the person who had held a camera steady on a pitching boat in the South China Sea while photographing a coastal shrine. She did not shake. The image was blurred the way photographs go blurry when the thing being photographed is not in the same place it was when the shutter opened. The wolf's head, in the 31st frame, was not level. It was inclined, down, toward the camera, approximately 15 degrees. She sat on the edge of the hotel bed for a long time. She did not close the laptop. She did not look away. She sat with the screen open and the image on it, and she let the whole thing be exactly what it was, without trying to file it somewhere, or explain it, or reduce it to something that fit in a column. That was new for her, sitting with something and not immediately trying to put it somewhere safe. It felt like holding something fragile that she wasn't sure she deserved to hold. She did not include the 31st photograph in her published paper. The paper ran 18 months later in a respected journal that she will not name here because she values her professional relationships, under the title Sacred Animal Iconography in Shinto Shrine Culture, a comparative analysis of guardian figure placement and devotional context across 5 sites in Tochigi Prefecture. It was well received. It was cited by 4 other researchers within the first year. The paper was thorough, careful, methodical, and almost entirely honest. It included 30 photographs of the Okami at Futarasan Shrine. In the acknowledgments section, at the very end, she thanked Reverend Takahashi for his generosity in granting access. She thanked the shrine staff for their patience. She thanked her university department for the fellowship funding. She did not mention what happened in the courtyard. She did not mention the lens cap. She did not mention the 11 seconds. She wrote 2 paragraphs in her field log that day. The first paragraph was professional, observational. It documented the lighting conditions, the stone condition, the approximate dimensions of the statue, the positioning relative to the lattice screen, the ambient temperature, the duration of the visit. It was the kind of paragraph that a field researcher writes when everything has gone as expected. The second paragraph was 1 sentence. She has read it 41 times since she wrote it. She knows the number is 41 because she has counted. She counts things. Always has, always will, and the reason she counts how many times she has read it is the same reason she bolted that particular door 4 years ago. Because she needs to know she can still find the door. Because she needs to know the thing behind the door is still there. She has never shown the sentence to anyone. Her colleague Dele, the only person who has known her long enough to ask, has never asked about the field log entry from December 9th in Nikko. He is a smart man. He knows what questions she will answer, and which ones will make her look at him the way she looked at the lens cap on the courtyard floor, like the question has personally wronged her. He knows she keeps something folded in the front cover of her field notebook. A photograph, physical print, the kind you have to go to a shop and ask someone to make, the kind that requires deliberate intention, the kind that no accident produces. He has seen her take the notebook out of her bag 100 times. He has watched her open the front cover. He has watched whatever she keeps in there stay in there, private, folded, held inside the cover like a letter you carry but can't bring yourself to send. He has never asked. She has never offered. That is, between them, a kind of love, the kind that knows the shape of the door and respects it. The thing about Amara Osei, and this is important, this is the whole thing, really, is that she was not a person who needed to be convinced. She had spent 11 years in the company of the sacred, and she had organized herself against it so thoroughly that the question of being convinced had stopped being relevant. She was not a skeptic. Skeptics are still in conversation with the thing they doubt. Amara had stepped outside that conversation entirely. She had done the field work. She had read the scholarship. She understood on an intellectual and historical level why these objects mattered to the cultures that made them, and she respected that completely, and she felt nothing. Not nothing like emptiness. Nothing like safety. The wolf broke the safety. Not by proving something to her. Not by performing a miracle she could take to a lecture hall and present as evidence. If it had done that, if the head had moved while the head priest was watching, while cameras were recording, while there was any framework available for making it mean something definitive, she would have been fine. She would have filed it under unexplained phenomena and continued her work and eventually found a way to organize it. It moved when she was alone, when she had dropped her lens cap and was standing in the cold counting seconds and holding her breath. When there was nobody else in the courtyard and no documentation running and nothing to protect her from the simple, devastating fact of it, it moved for her. Not to prove something, to see her. That is the distinction that she sits with, the one she has not been able to close back up behind that particular door. Not, this is evidence of something supernatural. Not, I have witnessed a miracle, but simply, something that has been sitting in that courtyard for 1,000 years, turned its head and looked at me as though it knew me, and I did not know what to do with being known. She still does not know what to do with it. She has stopped trying to figure out what to do with it. That, for Amara Osei, is the closest thing to faith she has ever come. She went back to Nikko the following December. She did not apply for academic access. She did not write Reverend Takahashi any letters. She did not bring her research camera, or her field log, or her tripod, or any of the professional equipment that usually traveled with her. She bought a bus ticket from the station. She walked the cedar road. She bent her head at the low gate. She stood in the outer courtyard, because the inner courtyard was not accessible to ordinary visitors, and she stood there for about 40 minutes in the December cold, and she did not take any photographs. She thought about the spreadsheet, about all 218 entries, 219 now, counting the follow-up trip to Kyoto she had taken in March. She thought about the papers she had published, the ones in progress, the field work scheduled for the following spring. She thought about what it would mean to be the kind of person who came to a shrine in winter with no camera, no field log, no professional purpose. Just to stand in the cold and be in proximity to something that had once inclined its head toward her. She thought it would mean she had changed. She thought she might have. Reverend Takahashi found her in the outer courtyard. She did not know how long he had been watching her before she noticed him. He was standing at the edge of the covered walkway that ran along the south side of the courtyard, in the same careful, economical stillness that she remembered from the year before. He looked at her. She looked at him. He walked over. He stood beside her, not facing her, facing the courtyard in the same direction she was facing. He said something in Japanese that she almost caught. She asked him, carefully, in the Japanese she had spent the past year studying, more deliberately than she had studied anything since her doctorate. Can you say that again? More slowly? He looked at her sideways. Something in his face shifted. Not quite a smile. Something smaller than a smile and more genuine. He repeated it more slowly. She caught it this time. He said, "You left without asking any questions." She thought about that for a moment. "I didn't know what to ask," she said. He nodded. He stood with her in the cold for another few minutes. He pointed, once, toward the lattice screen that separated the outer courtyard from the inner one, and he said something brief that she understood completely. "It is still the same." She nodded. She did not ask what he meant. He already knew she understood. She has 231 entries in her spreadsheet now. Entry 218 is still highlighted yellow. She has not changed the color. She has not added any annotation to the cell beyond the standard fields. Anyone looking at the spreadsheet would see nothing remarkable about row 218. Just another shrine, another visit date, another series of photographs. The photographs are all filed correctly. 30 of them, lateral angles, various heights, consistent documentation, properly indexed. The 31st photograph is not in the archive. It is in the front cover of a field notebook that she carries in her bag every single day, folded once, the image facing inward, so that opening the cover does not expose it accidentally. To see it, you have to unfold it deliberately. You have to want to see it. She unfolds it deliberately, sometimes on planes, late at night when the cabin has gone dark and she is the only one awake in her row, sometimes at her desk in the university, in the space between closing one paper and opening another. Sometimes, apparently, at random, Deli has seen her take the notebook out and hold it without opening the laptop or reviewing notes or doing any of the things that usually accompany the notebook's appearance. He has seen this enough times that he no longer pretends not to notice. He simply lets her have it. She presented a paper at a conference in Seoul the following spring. A good paper, one that was well received, one that advanced a genuinely interesting argument about the relationship between guardian iconography and spatial organization in mountain shrine complexes. She was sharp in the Q&A. She knew her material completely. She was, by any professional measure, at the top of her field. A younger researcher came up to her afterward, a doctoral candidate, Ghana-born like her, working on sacred object documentation in West African contexts. They talked for a while about methodology, about access difficulties, about the challenges of maintaining academic objectivity when the objects themselves carry so much weight. The doctoral candidate asked her, near the end of the conversation, whether she had ever felt anything when she was in the field. Not observed, not documented, felt. Amara looked at her for a moment. She thought about the lens cap, the 11 seconds, the 15 degrees. She thought about what it felt like to kneel on cold stone and not know when you had gone down. She thought about 41 readings of one sentence in a field log that nobody else had ever seen. Yes, she said. The doctoral candidate waited. Amara picked up her conference bag from the seat beside her and stood up. Once, she said. She smiled. The small, precise, slightly devastating smile of a woman who has decided what she is willing to share, and has shared exactly that and no more. She said goodbye. She walked out of the conference room and down the corridor toward the hotel elevators, and somewhere in her bag, in the front cover of a field notebook, a photograph of a stone wolf with its head inclined 15 degrees pressed gently against the cover as she walked, the way a folded thing presses when it is carried close. The cedar forest at Futarasan Shrine in winter is not a comfortable place, but she has stood in 231 sacred sites across 14 countries, and she will tell you, if you are the kind of person she chooses to tell, that discomfort is not the thing to be afraid of. The thing to be afraid of, the thing that takes real courage, is standing in front of something that is capable of seeing you and letting yourself be seen. She knows this now. She learned it from a stone wolf that hadn't moved in 1,000 years, until it did. The photograph exists. The sentence in the field log exists. The mark on her palm faded in 2 days. The 41 is now 67. She stopped counting after 67 because counting had started to feel like keeping the door closed, and she had decided, somewhere between December in Nikko and spring in Seoul, that she was done with that particular kind of safety. Row 218 in the spreadsheet is still yellow. She has not changed it. She will not.